You wake up one morning 30 years old, and for a split second, you forget who you're supposed to be. The ceiling is the same. The alarm is the same, but something under your skin feels off. Like a frequency you used to hear has gone silent. You reach for your phone out of reflex, scrolling through curated fragments of people who somehow figured it out already. They're running companies, publishing books, buying houses, raising families, all before 30, some before 25. You think of your own life, not with shame exactly, but with a dull, echoing unease, like you were invited to a race you never agreed to run, and now everyone else is already at the finish line. You've done things, tried, failed, maybe even succeeded, just not in the ways the world told you would count. And now there's a shadow following you, a question, cold and sharp as a blade. What if you missed your chance? What if the clock really did run out? This is the moment they don't prepare you for. Not in school, not in college, not in the motivational noise that floods your feed. Because this isn't burnout. This isn't laziness. This is something deeper. Existential. A tremor in the identity. You've spent years constructing. The world told you, you should be successful by 30. But it never told you what kind of success. It never told you what to do if you weren't. And so here you are, trapped between two worlds. The one you were promised, and the one you actually inhabit. Now ask yourself this. Where did that deadline come from? Who decided 30 was the end of the beginning? Who sold you the myth that purpose has an expiration date? You've watched others ascend while you stagnated. Or perhaps you ascended in one dimension, money, fame, relationships. But inside, you're hollow, quietly unraveling. What if success isn't always loud and obvious? What if it's subtle, painful, invisible, like roots growing underground in total darkness, preparing for something greater? Carl Jung once wrote, "Thoroughly unprepared, we take the step into the afternoon of life. Worse still, we take this step with the false presupposition that our truths and ideals will serve us as they did in the morning." What if 30 is not the end, but the threshold? The dangerous crossing between the morning and afternoon of the psyche? And what if the very things that made you feel like a failure are actually the ashes from which something rare is meant to rise? Here is the paradox you were never taught to understand. You can be wildly behind in the eyes of the world, and exactly on time in the eyes of your soul. But this is not permission to remain asleep. This is not comfort. This is a summons, because while others may run the race of achievement, you are now being called to something far more treacherous. To turn inward, to confront the truth beneath your identity, to destroy the timeline you were given, and forge one that was meant for you. But this won't be easy. The psyche doesn't evolve through hacks or productivity tools. It evolves through confrontation, suffering, death, and rebirth. Jung called this individuation, a process by which a person becomes who they truly are, not who they were told to be. But if that is true, then why does failure feel so suffocating? Why does 30 feel like a guillotine rather than a gateway? Why does the absence of worldly success threaten your very sense of self? Could it be that your pain isn't proof of failure, but a signal that something deeper is ready to emerge? This is the question no one wants to ask. What if the first 30 years were never meant to bring success, but awakening? And what if true success, the kind that cannot be seen but only felt, requires the death of everything false inside you? You are standing at the cliff's edge, staring down into an unknown that terrifies you. But maybe, just maybe, the fall isn't death. Maybe it's flight. What follows is not advice. It is an initiation into the hidden architecture of your mind, into the lies that shaped your identity, into the unseen wounds that have quietly dictated your timeline. You are not late. You are being summoned. And now we must descend deeper into the why. Why does this invisible pressure exist? Why do so many feel it? And what force lies beneath the myth of success by 30 that has colonized the modern soul? Let's go there. Let's tear it down. The feeling isn't random. That invisible pressure squeezing your lungs when you think of where you should be. The quiet despair when you compare yourself to a friend, a sibling, or someone you've never met but somehow feel you're failing next to. The tension in your gut when you scroll through other people's highlight reels, seeing yourself reflected not in their triumphs, but in what you lack. This isn't just social conditioning. This is a spiritual inheritance, and it runs deep, beneath the surface of your daily decisions, into the foundations of how your identity was constructed. If you've reached 30 without the hallmarks of success, without wealth, status, security, or clarity, you're not broken. You're exposed. You're standing raw at the crossroads between what society expects from you and what your psyche demands of you. It's not that you haven't succeeded. It's that the metric you've been using was never yours to begin with. The myth of the linear life. Modern life worships the straight line. Graduate by 22. Achieve by 30. Stabilize by 40. Retire by 60. Then, what? Fade? We live in a culture that mistakes developmental milestones for existential truth. You are taught to climb, to acquire, to achieve. But what if the soul doesn't evolve in a line? What if it unfolds in cycles? Like the moon, like the seasons, like breath. Carl Jung argued that the human psyche moves in archetypal stages. In your youth, the world wants you to build a strong ego, your identity, your persona. But around the age of 30, a shift occurs. The unconscious begins to knock. Everything you once chased starts to lose flavor. The jobs feel empty. The goals become mechanical. The roles you once played no longer fit. This is not failure. This is the threshold of individuation. The moment you begin to question, not just what you want, but who you are beneath the mask. Yet society has no language for this. It pathologizes your confusion, labels your transition as a crisis. But this is not dysfunction. It is the beginning of authenticity. 2. The ego's silent tyranny. From childhood, you were trained to construct an ego. Your ego is not evil, it is necessary. It helps you navigate the world. It tells you who you are. But it also wants control. It fears uncertainty. And it measures your worth through external validation, money, attention, approval. So when you hit 30 and haven't made it, the ego panics, because it cannot comprehend value that isn't visible. But here's the problem. The ego was never meant to rule your life. It was meant to serve something higher, the self. Not the self as personality, but as totality, the divine blueprint hidden within your unconscious. Jung wrote that the greatest tragedy is not reaching your potential. It's mistaking your ego for your essence. So when you feel like you've failed, pause. Ask, who is speaking, my ego or my soul? One wants power, the other wants meaning. Third, the hidden cultural machinery. This myth of early success didn't appear in a vacuum. It was engineered. Modern capitalism thrives on insecurity. If you believed that you were enough without proving it, would you still chase, buy, compare, compete? Our entire culture is built on the illusion of scarcity. Time is running out. You're falling behind. You must be something now, or you'll be nothing forever. This is the machinery behind your anxiety, and it's invisible because you were raised inside it. Aldous Huxley once warned that the most dangerous kind of slavery is one where the slaves don't realize they're in chains. In a world obsessed with youth and speed, turning 30 without success feels like exile. But what if the truth is this? You were never meant to be ahead by 30. You were meant to be becoming. Evi, the philosophy of becoming. Nietzsche spoke of becoming who you are as the ultimate task of life. But becoming is slow, uncertain, messy. You cannot schedule a spiritual transformation the way you schedule a meeting. The deeper truths of your life will not conform to LinkedIn timelines or 5-year plans. That's why your discomfort isn't meaningless, it's sacred. It's a symptom of friction between your false identity and your true calling. Schopenhauer wrote that most people mistake the illusion of their will for their true essence. We think we will ourselves toward success, but often, we're chasing shadows handed down to us by others. And what if that's what this moment is about? A confrontation with the shadows. The 3 illusions that keep you trapped. There are three major illusions that most people carry into their 30s without questioning. 1. The timeline illusion. That life must happen in a specific order by a specific age. That 30 is a deadline rather than a doorway. This illusion breeds panic, shame, and frantic action divorced from purpose. 2. The comparison illusion. That other people's visible success reflects their internal truth. That what you see on the surface mirrors what you're missing. This illusion blinds you to the slow, hidden growth within yourself. 3. The identity illusion. That your worth is defined by your current role, title, income, or status. That being behind means being less. This illusion keeps you clinging to an ego that is meant to dissolve. To free yourself, you must pierce these illusions, not with force, but with awareness. Because what you're feeling is not a breakdown. It's a rupture, an initiation into a deeper form of truth. This is the moment where most people retreat. They numb, distract, overcompensate. But if you've read this far, maybe you're ready for something else. Maybe you're ready to see not just the roots of your struggle, but its consequences. Because this isn't just about you. This silent myth of success by 30 is shaping everything. Our culture, our relationships, our sense of self-worth. So what happens when we let it rule us? That's where we go next. You don't even notice it at first. It starts in small, almost invisible ways. The shrinking of dreams, the subtle recalibration of what's realistic, the quiet decision to stop trying, because you've convinced yourself it's too late. Not consciously, not with a declaration, but with a slow erosion of self-belief. By 30, you've internalized the myth. If you haven't made it by now, you probably never will. And so, without knowing it, you begin to live in a smaller version of yourself. This is the tragedy, not the absence of success, but the gradual collapse of potential. Not the failure to arrive, but the choice to never leave the station again, i.e. the psychological decay. Cognitive psychologists call it identity foreclosure, a term for when someone settles too early on a version of themselves that feels safe, even if it's not true. It happens when the fear of failure overrides the hunger for discovery. You stop exploring who you might be and start clinging to who you've already been. You protect the image, not the soul. And the longer you live inside this false self, the more your inner life begins to atrophy. Your thoughts turn rigid, your emotions become dulled. Your creativity, once spontaneous, now whispers only in the margins. This is not a mental health crisis. This is a spiritual suffocation. You are alive, but you're no longer becoming. Carl Jung warned that what you do not bring to consciousness becomes fate. In other words, if you don't confront the unconscious forces shaping your path, you will live them out as destiny. And the most dangerous unconscious force? The belief that your life has already passed its peak. To the neurology of stuckness. Your brain adapts to repetition. If you repeat a pattern long enough, wake, scroll, compare, shrink, it becomes a neural groove. Like a path through a forest, you travel so often that it becomes the only visible way forward. Your mind, seeking efficiency, begins to prune away other possibilities. So the more you think it's too late, the more your brain begins to reinforce that belief biologically. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Your own biology becomes a cage, one made of thought patterns, assumptions, and unchallenged narratives. And over time, the bars of this cage harden, not because it's true, but because you've lived as though it is. 3. The cultural feedback loop. Now multiply this by millions. An entire generation measuring themselves by an invisible, unrealistic clock. Social media becomes a mirror maze. You see versions of success that are edited, curated, timed perfectly to shame your slower progress. You are not seeing reality. You are seeing highlights framed through a cultural lens that worships early achievement and punishes slow growth. And in that environment, to be 30 and still becoming feels like sin. It shouldn't surprise us that depression rates spike around the late 20s and early 30s. That quarter-life crises are more common than midlife ones. That people with extraordinary inner lives slowly abandon them. Because the world doesn't reward invisible depth. It rewards visible results. But here's the cost. You stop taking risks. You stop listening to your intuition. You accept roles that shrink you because at least there's something. You enter what Sartre called bad faith, the act of deceiving yourself in order to avoid the anguish of freedom. You pretend you're okay with who you've become, but the truth is still there, burning behind your eyes. You feel it when you're alone. You feel it when you laugh but don't mean it. You feel it when your soul whispers at 2 a.m. This isn't all you were meant to be. Ivy, the relationship crisis. This silent myth doesn't just shape your career. It distorts how you love. When you feel behind, unworthy, uncertain, you project it. You enter relationships to feel validated, not seen. You settle because you're afraid your timeline won't allow waiting for something more real. Or worse, you become emotionally unavailable, cloaking your fear of inadequacy in detachment, performance, or endless busyness. Because how can you offer intimacy when your identity feels like an unfinished script? You see, the person who doesn't believe they've made it by 30 often begins to behave like someone undeserving of joy. They push away good things before they arrive. They overgive or undershow. They become caretakers, clowns, fixers, anything but themselves. Why? Because the myth has taught them, you are not enough until you succeed. And so love becomes a transaction, not a sanctuary. The lost generations. Zoom out even further. Now we're talking about a society that exalts early success and ignores late bloomers. That idolizes child prodigies and dismisses the late awakenings of genius. Do you know how many people created their greatest work after 30? Jung didn't publish psychological types until 43. Van Gogh sold one painting in his life. He was 37 when he died, unknown. Toni Morrison published her first novel at 39. Harlan Sanders didn't start KFC until 65. But you won't hear about that on your feed. Because virality, not depth, is the currency of our age. So entire generations walk around ashamed of the time it takes them to grow. And when they do bloom, it's quietly, in the shadows. Because no one claps for roots, only for flowers. The soul's despair. Let's strip away the psychology, the culture, the neurology. Let's speak plainly. The deepest consequence of this myth is this. You forget that you are allowed to start again. That you can reinvent. That you can shatter the path you've been walking and build a new one from scratch. That there is no expiration date on your becoming. But the longer you believe you're behind, the longer you'll stay behind. Not because it's true, but because the belief shapes your behavior. And behavior shapes your destiny. If you do nothing, if you simply accept this invisible script, it will write itself into your bones. And you will wake up one day not just 30, but 40, 50, 60, still haunted by the life you were afraid to claim. You cannot afford that. This is the moment, not to rush, but to rebel, because something in you already knows. The map you've been following was made for someone else. So now the question becomes, how do you break free? Not just from the timeline, but from the very way you've been thinking about success, self-worth, and identity. It's time to rebel. Are you ready? Because how can you offer intimacy when your identity feels like an unfinished script? You see, the person who doesn't believe they've made it by 30 often begins to behave like someone undeserving of joy. They push away good things before they arrive. They overgive or undershow. They become caretakers, clowns, fixers, anything but themselves. Why? Because the myth has taught them, you are not enough until you succeed. And so love becomes a transaction, not a sanctuary. The lost generations. Zoom out even further. Now we're talking about a society that exalts early success and ignores late bloomers. That idolizes child prodigies and dismisses the late awakenings of genius. Do you know how many people created their greatest work after 30? Jung didn't publish psychological types until 43. Van Gogh sold one painting in his life. He was 37 when he died, unknown. Toni Morrison published her first novel at 39. Harlan Sanders didn't start KFC until 65. But you won't hear about that on your feed. Because virality, not depth, is the currency of our age. So entire generations walk around ashamed of the time it takes them to grow. And when they do bloom, it's quietly, in the shadows. Because no one claps for roots, only for flowers. Phi, the soul's despair. Let's strip away the psychology, the culture, the neurology. Let's speak plainly. The deepest consequence of this myth is this. You forget that you are allowed to start again, that you can reinvent, that you can shatter the path you've been walking and build a new one from scratch, that there is no expiration date on your becoming. But the longer you believe you're behind, the longer you'll stay behind. Not because it's true, but because the belief shapes your behavior, and behavior shapes your destiny. If you do nothing, if you simply accept this invisible script, it will write itself into your bones, and you will wake up one day not just 30, but 40, 50, 60, still haunted by the life you were afraid to claim. You cannot afford that. This is the moment, not to rush, but to rebel, because something in you already knows. The map you've been following was made for someone else. So now the question becomes, how do you break free? Not just from the timeline, but from the very way you've been thinking about success, self-worth, and identity. It's time to rebel. Are you ready? You're not broken. You're not behind. But you are in danger if you keep living by a map that leads you away from yourself. Now is not the time to adjust your expectations. Now is the time to burn the script. Because what if everything you thought was failure was simply preparation? And what if the fact that you haven't succeeded by 30 doesn't mean you're late? It means you're free, free from the golden handcuffs of early success, free from the invisible prison of ego validation, free to build a life that isn't a performance, but a pilgrimage. This is not a motivational speech. It's a quiet revolution. And like all revolutions of the soul, it begins with a betrayal. The betrayal of the timeline. I let go of the clock, reclaim the compass. The rebellion begins the moment you realize time is a servant, not a master. The myth told you, follow the clock. By 25, do this. By 30, do that. But clocks measure minutes, not meaning. Carl Jung wrote that the first half of life is about building a strong ego, but the second half is about listening to the deeper self, the eternal compass within. So ask yourself, what if instead of measuring where you should be, you began asking who you're called to be? The soul does not care if you're 30 or 60. It only asks, are you willing to hear me now? That willingness, that is the rebellion. 2. Embrace slow power. The world rewards speed, but the soul matures slowly. This is your paradox to accept, not fight. Great trees do not rush their roots. Volcanoes do not erupt on command. You are not a product. You are a process. You must be willing to disappear for a while, to stop performing, to let the world forget you while you remember yourself. This is what Jung called the descent into the unconscious, the refusal to live only on the surface, the decision to go inward, downward, into the rich, terrifying soil of your own depths. It looks like nothing from the outside, but inside a revolution is taking place. 3. Create without proof. You've been waiting to be ready. You've been waiting for the results, the signs, the validation. But rebellion requires something more dangerous. Creating without evidence. This means writing without an audience. Starting the business without a clear roadmap. Loving without guarantees. Becoming without applause. Nietzsche said that to live creatively is to live dangerously. It means trusting that your instincts know something your logic hasn't caught up to yet. You don't wait for confidence. You cultivate courage in its absence. This is where real success begins. Not with outcomes, but with integrity. Not with certainty, but with movement. IV, do the opposite of the algorithm. Everything in modern life trains you to seek external approval. The likes, the follows, the views, the applause. But the path of the soul requires disobedience. Do things that are not optimized. Make art that no one understands. Pursue joy over metrics. Say no to opportunities that misalign with your truth, even if they pay well or look good on paper. The algorithm wants you to be consistent. The self wants you to be authentic. There's a difference, and the cost of confusing the two is your life. V. Honor the sacred boredom. You've been taught that every minute should be productive. But some of the most profound transformations happen in what looks like wasted time. Wandering, sitting in silence, journaling with no goal, asking questions you cannot answer yet. Viktor Frankl spoke of the existential vacuum, a state where life seems empty and meaningless, before the emergence of deeper purpose. Don't rush to fill the vacuum. Let it stretch you. This boredom is not the absence of meaning. It is the clearing where meaning will appear, if you have the courage to wait. Build the inner cathedral. You've been trying to build a life externally, but the real rebellion is building internally. What are your values? What will you suffer for? Who are you when no one is watching? Ask yourself, if you had no need to impress anyone, what would you devote yourself to? That answer is your cathedral, and it may take years to build. So what? You're not racing anymore. You're creating something sacred. Let it be slow. Let it be deep. Let it be true. Second, tell a better myth. Right now, you are living inside someone else's myth of success. It's not just an idea, it's a story structure, and it's governing your life. But here's the gift Jung gave us, the power to rewrite the myth. You are not a failure for being 30 and still uncertain. You are the hero in the thick of transformation. Do you remember how all the great myths begin? The hero is lost. The village rejects them. The world falls apart. They descend into darkness. And only then, only there, do they begin to awaken. Your story is not off course. It is exactly where stories of depth and power begin. So stop asking, am I behind? Start asking, what kind of myth do I want to live? Begin anyway. Here is the most radical act in a world that worships arrival. To begin without knowing the end. To write the first page before the plot reveals itself. To take the first step when the staircase is invisible. To believe that what's calling you is real, even if no one else sees it yet. This is the rebellion. Not noise, not defiance for its own sake, but the quiet, steady refusal to abandon your inner truth. No matter how late it feels, no matter how invisible the progress, no matter how deep the winter before the bloom. Because here's the secret, you are not late. You are just not on their map. You're on your own, and it's more dangerous, but it's also more beautiful. Now go, not because you're certain, but because the rebellion has begun inside you, and there is no turning back. You've shattered the myth. You've seen the trap. You've felt the power of the rebellion. But there is still one thing left. One truth so profound, so quiet, that it changes everything. It is the final insight, the one that reframes the entire journey. Are you ready to hear it? Imagine this. You've dropped the expectations. You've walked away from the race. You've let go of the timeline. And yet, there's still a question burning in you. If success isn't what I thought, then what is all this pain for? The answer doesn't come as a thunderclap. It comes quietly, like snowfall in the dark. A realization so simple, so devastatingly obvious, that it almost slips past you unnoticed. You were never meant to succeed. You were meant to transform. That's it. That's the truth. Every disappointment, every missed deadline, every rejection, confusion, false start, they weren't obstacles on the path. They were the path. Your pain wasn't in the way of your evolution. It was your evolution. The alchemy of meaning. Carl Jung believed that the soul's deepest desire is not happiness, but wholeness. And wholeness comes not by eliminating the broken parts, but by integrating them. Success, as you were taught, meant addition. More. Better. Higher. But the soul doesn't grow by addition. It grows by alchemy. Not, how do I win? But, what do I do with what I've been given? You see, the myth of success told you to eliminate failure. But the deeper path says, take your failures, your shame, your delays, and transmute them. Make gold from wounds. Make wisdom from waiting. Make music from the years no one saw you. This is not metaphor, it's psychology. The very act of facing your darkest moments, of staying with them without flinching. That is what matures the soul. The real journey was never external. You thought the mountain was out there, that you'd climb it with titles, money, approval, beauty, applause. But the real summit was inward, and every so-called failure by 30, each one took you deeper inside, into the places most people avoid their entire lives, into the shadow Jung spoke of, the repressed, denied, forgotten pieces of yourself. This is the truth they never teach. The deeper you go inward, the more capacity you create for outward impact. Not performance, not persona, presence. That's what people feel when they meet someone who's done the work. It's not charisma, it's gravity. And that gravity only forms in the crucible of slowness, stillness, and suffering. 3. The self was calling all along. You kept looking for signs from the world, but the signs were inside you the whole time. That ache, that longing, that weird, quiet discomfort in rooms where everyone else seemed fine, that was the self calling. Not the small self, the ego, but the deep self. The eternal pattern in you, trying to emerge. You thought you were lost, but you were being summoned, and the longer you ignored it, the more unbearable the world became. Because when the self calls and you refuse to listen, life begins to feel surreal, like you're acting in a play written for someone else. Jung believed that the greatest act of healing is to align the outer life with the inner truth. That's all success ever really meant. Not fame, not wealth, but alignment. V. The paradox of arrival. So many people spend their lives trying to arrive. At 30, at security, at clarity, at enough. But here's the final paradox. There is no arrival. There's only unfolding. You will never wake up one day and feel fully finished, because to be human is to be in process. And if you truly embrace this, you begin to understand. The point of this life was never to win. It was to wake up. Wake up to your patterns. Wake up to your pain. Wake up to your potential. Not as a fixed thing, but as a becoming. You are not a static entity. You are a living question. And every year you thought you were behind was just another season of compost, of old identities dying so something richer could grow. V. The beauty of the unlived life. Now look again at your life. The missed promotions. The creative projects that went nowhere. The relationships that ended before they began. The ideas that never got off the ground. You thought they were dead ends. But maybe they were gestures, part of a greater design you couldn't see yet. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." What if that's happening right now? Not in a headline, not in a breakthrough, but in this very moment, this silent, sacred reckoning. Because what you're doing right now, facing the myth, feeling the fear, continuing anyway, is what most never do. That is success. Not glamorous, not viral, but real. And real success doesn't announce itself. It grows silently inside you, like a tree whose roots stretch deeper before it ever bears fruit. V. A final image. Close your eyes. Picture yourself at 60, sitting alone in the quiet of a morning. You are not rich in the way the world defines it, but you are rich in time, rich in presence, rich in knowing who you are. The people around you don't admire your resume. They are drawn to your peace, your clarity, your warmth, because you took the harder path, the deeper path, the path inward, when it would have been easier to distract, to settle, to perform. This is what it means to live well. Not fast, not loud, but true. So what do you do now? You stop asking if you're late. You stop asking if it's worth it. You stop trying to impress ghosts. And you start listening to the part of you that never cared about any of that. You pick up the pen. You send the message. You walk into the gym. You forgive yourself for the years you thought were wasted. You make the thing. You risk love again. You begin as if for the first time. Because it is the first time you're doing it as you. So if you haven't succeeded by 30, do this instead. Awaken, rebel, reclaim, become. You were never late. You were only becoming something timeless. And now, you're finally ready.